Hello there, lovely people. It's Alex from Nintendo Life here, and today we're reviewing for you Blasphemous 2 on the Nintendo Switch. This review was originally written by the wonderful PJ O'Reilly and has been adapted for video by me. But anyway, that's more than enough waffling. Let's dive right into things. We're big fans of 2019's Blasphemous, the Game Kitchen's exquisitely dark and gory action platformer that saw players assume the role of the Penitent One as he faced off against the eternally damned denizens of Cvstodia. With top-notch hack-and-slash action, grotesque bosses, an intricately animated pixel art style, and some slick platforming to boot, it remains one of our absolute favourite platformers on Nintendo Switch. With Blasphemous 2, the story picks up directly after the events of The Wounds of Eventide, the game's final slice of DLC. The miracle has now returned to Cvstodia, and the Penitent One has been resurrected from his eternal slumber to set out on another blood-soaked romp that sees him on the trail of 3 hideous guardians, and that's just for starters. In terms of the sequel's look and feel, the Game Kitchen has wisely chosen to continue in the same stylistic vein as its predecessor. This really is one of the very best-looking platformers out there, with intricately detailed animations accompanying every step, slide, and slash the Penitent One makes as he reacquaints himself with the wonderfully twisted religious iconography and demented enemy designs that haunt every chapel, corridor, and cave of Cvstodia. Whilst things look and sound much the same as before, the core combat and platforming has seen rather a tasty overhaul. The Penitent One's single sword, the Mea Culpa, has been replaced with 3 upgradable weapons, which gives you far more choice in how you proceed to devastate your adversaries. As you're resurrected at the start of the game, you're given a choice as to which of these weapons you want to set out with. The Veredicto, a great big flaming incense burner, does most of the damage, but is the slowest option, but is also the best. This is the one PJ chose as well, so it's bound to be the best choice. Sarmiento and Centella are 2 incredibly fast rapier-style swords wrapped in metal thorns, and are the quickest but the weakest option. Lastly, Rugo Al Alba sits in the middle ground as an all-rounder with some fancy upgrades to add to its usefulness. Each of the weapons here has an impressively large skill tree of new moves to unlock via markers of martyrdom, which you'll gather as you blast through your foes. No matter which weapon you start with, over the course of the campaign, you'll eventually get your hands on all 3, giving you a much larger arsenal of maneuvers to pull off and instantaneously switch between as needed. It's a setup that feels deeper and more rewarding than the first game's singular sword, although we do still miss our fully pimped up Mea Culpa. Your bolstered armory then feeds directly into the platforming, which is also a step up from what we saw in the Penitent One's first outing. While things get off to a rather slow start as you trudge through the first few areas with one weapon, your dash, and a single jump, you'll soon find yourself blasting through ghastly barriers made from corpses, using Sarmiento and Centella to blink across chasms via magical mirrors, and ringing great big bells to temporarily reveal platforms and open doors that you'll then need to race through. There's some cracking puzzle design on show here, and the game makes sure to take its time, introducing each aspect of environmental manipulation before beginning to mix them up and combine them in increasingly fiendish ways. There's also a very welcoming curve to how the ante is upped in terms of enemy difficulty. Whilst the completely obvious Dark Souls influences and overall vibe may smack of very hard game trademark, what you've actually got here is a well-balanced and welcoming experience that wants you to explore every nook and cranny of its twisted world as much as it wants you to bash an undead bishop's face in with his own candelabra. Right from the offset, your in-game map is marked with the locations of your 3 guardian targets, and you're free to wander off in any direction, figuring out where you can and can't go and slowly opening up new areas as you add more abilities to your repertoire in classic Metroidvania fashion. As things progress, the difficulty does begin to increase, of course. The world darkens and a whole new challenge reveals itself, although we're not going to go into any spoiler material here, but by the time that happens, most players should have a good enough handle of the ins and outs of the game's brutal and incredibly satisfying combat to get by. Make no mistake, hardcore players will find plenty to challenge them here, but this isn't a game that hits you with any brick walls or huge difficulty spikes early doors. Another new gameplay addition comes in the form of all new magic abilities, or prayers. These are separated into quick verses, which are your one-button elemental attacks, and chants, which are charged area of effect attacks that require you to hold the down button or the down on the left stick and press A. There are loads of these to purchase and find during the campaign, with a good mix of electric bolts, magical axes, mystical spinning discs, and more for you to get your grubby hands on. You've also got your rosary beads, which allow you to add buffs as you go, and these too can be unlocked to give you even more slots. And lastly, you also have an altarpiece of favors where you can place wooden statues into 8 slots to give yourself even more buffs, such as increasing blocking timings, more damage when your life is low, and health recovery after pulling off one of the game's many bloody execution moves on one of your downed foes. None of this stuff is anything we haven't seen before in this genre, as with everything else in Blasphemous, but it's all pulled off with such style and panache. Every menu, item, weapon, and add-on has its own lore, and it all feeds into an overall sense of a world that's rich in detail. This level of attention to detail carries on to the many enemies and bosses you'll face off against as well. You're fighting cursed creatures. The inhabitants of Cvstodia are doomed to suffer eternal torment, and as much as they attack you venomously, there's a sense that they don't want to, that external entities are forcing them into a cycle of violence against their will. We're not sure we've played another game where you genuinely pity most of your foes as you take them down, quite like you do here. Alongside the nightmare priests, slab-carrying statues, specters, witches, and other abominations you'll face, there are also plenty of strange NPCs to chat with, most of whom require some odd artifact in order to get rewards. There's a bunch of very creepy nuns who need you to find their lost sisters, and surely you'll be rewarded handsomely for that. And what's with that great big bloated baby man with a golden mask who seems to be slowly unlocking a path for you to send a huge tower as you progress? All of this stuff makes for a world that's great to get lost in, full of secrets and oddities to explore and divert off the critical path as it slowly opens and unravels to reveal more and more of its hideous self. As with the first game, all the torment and violence here is filtered through a religious lens. It seeps out of every single pore of this adventure, and you can tell that it's a subject of importance and personal interest to the developers. Luckily, we find all of this religious iconography incredibly unsettling, so it makes for a perfect backdrop to the horrifyingly violent action. We should also mention Carlos Viola's superb soundtrack. It effortlessly switches between gentle Spanish guitar tracks and orchestral, massive, big, shouty wah. It's just a delight. We're holding off on revealing plenty of bits and bobs here, and the same goes for the gameplay in this video, but overall, Blasphemous 2 is a sequel that strikes an excellent balance between sticking to what made the first game feel so unique, while switching the core experience up enough to keep things more than interesting. If we'd been served up more of the same, we'd probably have been plenty happy, but the Game Kitchen has meaningfully improved the combat, elevated the platform, and refined the movement of your main protagonist, making for an experience that joins its predecessor at the very upper echelons of action platformers available on Nintendo Switch. Moving on to performance, Blasphemous 2 looks and sounds great in both docked and handheld modes, whilst performing perfectly for the vast majority of its running time. We did encounter the odd bit of slowdown and stutter in certain points of the game, even after a patch that dropped after we got the game, but overall it's smooth sailing as far as this aspect of proceeding goes. We also noticed a slight camera glitch at the top of one of the game's zones, with the view readjusting itself and sort of glitching a little bit as we jumped across the uppermost platforms, something which will hopefully get patched out ASAP. Beyond these minor niggles though, it's another resounding triumph for the Game Kitchen. Blasphemous 2 is a stellar sequel, the kind of follow-up that makes us want to go and dive right back into its predecessor and do a full series run, and a game that's got us hoping to see more from this fantastic franchise in the future. What a trilogy of games this could turn out to be. Blasphemous 2 sticks with the exquisitely dark and gory stars of its predecessor, whilst building on the core combat and improving upon the platforming that we saw the first time around. The Game Kitchen could easily have just served us up more of the same and we'd have been more than happy. However, they've made meaningful upgrades here, with deeper and more satisfying combat, and 3 upgradable weapon sets that combine perfectly with the environmental puzzling that feels more cohesive and fluid overall. The Penitent One's return to Cvstodia is an absolute banger. You've reached the end of the review. That means it's time for Alex's personal thoughts, and Frankly, I don't have a lot. I don't have much to add. It's a bloody great game. It does that wonderful thing that I always love about Metroidvanias, or at least ones that are done right, which is where you sort of feel like you just don't know where to go, and you're like, oh god, where am I supposed to go? And then you look at the map and you see, oh yeah, I never went right at that point. You know, it's just little things like that, and you go back there, and then suddenly there's all this extra stuff to do, and you're like, I could have done this earlier, but I didn't. I'm an idiot. For some reason, that makes me happy. The combat's great as well. I'm really pleased that I went with a sensor weapon, just because I'm always a fan of like the heavy weapons where you have to be careful about your timing and things like that. It's the same. I've always been the same, you know, Monster Hunter and stuff like that. I always go for the heavy stuff. Very rarely the quick stuff that does little damage, because why would you hit someone 50 times to do 50 damage when you could hit someone once and do 50 damage? That's not accurate to the actual damage numbers in this game. There's a load of influence here in terms of its mechanics from other games, especially something like Hollow Knight, but you know what? Hollow Knight is one of the best games that's ever been made, so frankly, if you're going to take inspiration from anything, then you might as well take it from that. And yep, it's absolutely great. If you like Metroidvanias, I genuinely don't think you'll find anything to dislike here. It's a good